I was in the first or second grade when my mom picked me up from school. And you can just tell the tone in your parents' voice that they're going to ask you something serious and they want something out of you. And my mom asked me a question. She said something like, you know, I talked to your teacher today. She said there was an incident in the cafeteria. She said that there was a table of boys that were sniffing pepper up their nose. Why didn't you join in with them? And that's not how I expected the conversation to go. And I remember looking at her with you too? I'm not doing that because it's ridiculous. I'm not putting pepper up my nose. But she wanted to know well, why? Everybody else was doing it. And I'm sure the teacher was conveying it to her in some positive manner. But she was also curious why I hadn't just joined in on the fun of the pepper sniffing. And that was the first time I think I was ever asked why I didn't try to be a people pleaser. And I don't know who recognizes in themselves a little bit of people pleasing. Psychologists define people pleasing as kind of patterns of behavior where an individual prioritizes other people's needs or expectations or desires, often to their own detriment, usually rooted in some sense of a desire for approval or a fear of rejection or just avoiding conflict altogether. And as a shorthand for people pleaser, we just kind of assume it's people who are afraid to say no. And sometimes that feels like an advantage. I'm sure when we're filling out committee kind of blanks, I need some help. It's nice to have people who say yes. There are times in our lives where it really is helpful for yeses, but it's not always harmless to be a people pleaser. Sometimes we're pushed into dilemmas where we have lose-lose scenarios is what it feels like, where we have competing people that we are wanting to please, and they have opposite perspectives that they are both pulling us towards, and we're in the anxiety of which person do I please. Or sometimes we feel the need to keep the people around us happy, and we become complicit in things that we would have never done on our own, and we live with regrets about how we've pleased someone else instead of our own conscience or desires. And so today I want to ask the question, who gets hurt when we're too afraid to disappoint our own people? We are starting a series called Can We Talk? Jesus' Wisdom for Conflict and Healing. And we're going to spend 6 weeks in Matthew with a bunch of conflict stories and see how Jesus responds to conflict in everyday life. And hopefully learn some wisdom because conflict is coming our way. That's just the nature of being alive. But Jesus has some things to teach us about it. And so we're going to read from Matthew chapter 14 today and to see about two different kinds of tables of conflict. Matthew 14 says, "At the time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus. And he said to his servants, 'This is John the Baptist. He's been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him.' For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been telling Herod, 'It is not lawful for you to have her.' Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised on oath to grant her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, 'Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter.' And the king was grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he commanded it to be given. And he sent and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl who brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried him. And then they went and told Jesus. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, and he cured their sick. And when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, 'This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves.' And Jesus said to them, 'They need not go away. You give them something to eat.' And they replied, 'We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, 'Bring them here to me.' And then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, and he blessed, and he broke the loaves, and he gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets and full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The word of the Lord for the people of the world. Thanks be to God. Now, this story has 2 dilemmas. Herod's story has a predicament. He's got a bad situation with John the Baptist. John has been calling out Herod's marriage, which is a quick way to get someone to feel personally attacked and not to feel pleasant feelings towards someone else. And I've only been here a little over a month, but I feel like we've had plenty of Bible stories with relationships that are not typical and are unusual. Here's another one. Herod has married his brother's wife. Interesting scenario. And John has called it out and said, this is not okay. And so both Herod and Herod's new wife are not pleased with John the Baptist. But John has a huge following in the wilderness and all these crowds. And so Herod's a little fearful of the political kind of ramifications of if he were to attack John the Baptist. But he kind of splits the difference and he imprisons him. So he's kind of like, I'm going to hold him hostage, but I'm not going to kind of lead to maybe as big of a revolt as if he had just killed John the Baptist. But Herod has a big birthday extravaganza. And it includes other weird scenes, like his stepdaughter performing a dance routine for him that gets him to say, I'll give you whatever you want. To which Herod never assumes this kind of response. I want John the Baptist's head. Herodias' daughter has kind of given her daughter the request that the mother wants. And Herod is in a predicament. He really wants to get rid of John the Baptist, but at what political cost? What can I do? How do I respond to this moment? And I want you to hold on to that for a second, and let's jump to Jesus for a moment. Jesus, in his scene, is fleeing or escaping or just withdrawing out into the wilderness because he's heard about the predicament of Herod and John the Baptist. And he wants to get to a deserted place to get alone. And all of the introverts in the room said amen. We know that feeling. I need to get away. And of course, in Jesus's stories, every time he tries to get away, people show up. And the crowd show up before he can even get out of the boat. And so all of these people have arrived. And it says that Jesus looks out at the crowd, and it doesn't say, and was exhausted about it all. You're like, oh, why? Jesus looks at the crowd and has compassion on them. And he sees them, and he begins to heal their sick. But the disciples' energy level is a little different than Jesus's. It's evening time, and they're like, okay, this is a deserted place. It's supposed to be deserted. Please send these people away. They're hungry, and we need them to go get their food. And the disciples think they know the best for this crowd. They think the crowds need to be dismissed more than they need to be with Jesus. And Jesus is left with a dilemma. Should I go along with my disciples' encouragement? And I want to assume Peter's not leading in this voice, or we would have gotten that note in the text that Peter's the one pushing this agenda. But the disciples want the crowds dismissed. Send them away. Let us get rid of these folks for a little while. Or should Jesus keep ministering to the sick and the hungry crowds desperate for him? Both Herod and Jesus are pressured by those closest to them in the story. Both pressured to fulfill their inner desires of what they really wanted to begin with, no matter what the big picture effects are. Herod, the text tells us, was grieved by this request. Yet out of regard, it says, for his oaths and for the guests, he commanded John's head to be given. Whatever internal grief was there, whether that was in the moment or in retrospect looking back, it loses out, and he gives a yes to the request because he promised he would do it, and he put himself in a bind. He gave a yes because he doesn't want to look bad in front of all of his closest friends and family members there for his birthday party. And his internal struggle, and however he feels about this in the moment, ends with John being beheaded and his head being offered as a birthday present on a platter. It's a gruesome scene of where kind of kings who go astray can lead you to. In contrast, Jesus is in the wilderness preparing a different kind of meal and a different kind of table. The disciples are pressing him, let the crowds go. And Jesus tells them they need not go away. You give them something to eat. I'm sure they loved this turn of events for themselves. Jesus, we already gave you great advice. Send them away. They'll figure out how to eat. But Jesus tells them, you give them food. Hungry folks don't like to share their food that much. And they're like, hey, we got nothing. We've got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. We've got nothing, Jesus. Please send them away. And Jesus does something in contrast to what they've told him to do. They ask him, send the crowds away. Jesus tells them, sit down. That feels like as big of a change as you can make in that request. He orders all of the crowd, sit down where you're at. And he asks the disciples to bring him the bread and the fish, and he starts tearing the bread, handing it to the disciples, and they keep handing it to the next person, to the next person, to the next person. And miraculously, there are more leftovers than what they even began with in the story, despite whatever imagination the disciples had to begin with. And when I think about these two stories, a story of this royal banquet feast table and this table that's out in the middle of the wilderness on the ground, they're very different pictures of navigating life and conflict and challenges. At Herod's table, reputation matters more than your conscience. You got to figure out how to swallow yourself, your ego, your conscience. Don't think about it. Just keep up appearances. The text doesn't tell us that Herod realizes it was the right thing to do to behead John. He's grieved about it. He knows it's the wrong thing to do, and yet he still does it because there's too many people watching him. Sometimes the most dangerous kind of table to sit at is the table where everybody knows something is wrong, but nobody wants to be the first person to say no. And everybody just holds it in and keeps up the appearances. At Herod's table, fear makes decisions. Despite his kind of royal status, Herod is fearful of a lot of things in the text. He's a tetrarch, fancy word for there's 4 rulers over kind of that Israel region in that time period. Herod the Great has 4 descendants that he passes his kingdom on to, 3 sons, 1 daughter. But they're rivaling, fighting for power. And this is part of probably what's going on with the weird marriage situation, is you're kind of competing for the honor and prestige and power of the situation. But Herod is afraid of the crowds and what they might do if he does certain things. He's afraid of what his family will do or say, or the people in the room will say or do. He's afraid of looking weak in front of his guests. He's afraid later that the stories of Jesus is actually John the Baptist reincarnate come to haunt him. He's constantly afraid. And the more afraid you are, the more tempted you are to hurt somebody. Because you stop seeing them as real people and you see them as threats. And so Herod's table fears make the decisions. And at Herod's table, people are eager to send others to do their dirty work. There's a term, triangulation, that relationship dynamic, where one person is trying to navigate 2 other people's challenge, and they're like the go-between, constantly trying to figure out how to fix the other person's problem. And triangulating problems often leads to someone's head on a platter because it is much easier to want something harsh to happen when I don't have to be the person doing it or being there in person to have the conversation. So I send somebody else to do the dirty work. Herodias doesn't want to make the request on her own. She sends her daughter to do it. But, Herod does this as well. Herod commands that John the Baptist be killed, but he doesn't go pick up the sword. He makes the soldiers do it. Everybody gets to be one step removed from the pain that they are causing, but they don't get to disappear from the responsibility or the blame. When they bring that head in and Herodias' daughter receives it, which horror movie, I don't know, it's getting an R-rated rating if it was in the theaters just for the scene alone. But when Herodias' daughter gets the head and takes it to her mom, everyone knows who wants this head. Eventually, it comes out. But despite the triangulation efforts, everyone knows who really wanted the violence and the pain. And when you are encountered someone who's furious, whether a coworker, a family member, a church member, whoever it is that has anger for someone else, you don't have to pick up the platter for somebody else. Unless you want to become a headhunter, because that's where triangulating ends up. But at Jesus' table, people are not treated as disposable. When his disciples are ready to send people away, Jesus simply says they need not go away. Give them something to eat. There's always someone in the room who has reasons to send somebody else away, to exclude somebody else. They're too difficult, they're too needy, too different, too conservative, too progressive, too poor, too angry, too religious, too irreligious. There's always a temptation to figure out who we can point at and say they need to leave. But Jesus compassionately looks at the crowds. He sees them and he says they don't need to go. And I think compassion starts with having your eyes open, with seeing the humanity in front of you. There's a reason if a private equity firm is brought in to maximize profits, that you probably don't want the CEO spending a lot of time with the customers and with the low-level staff. Because if you're going to make difficult decisions and cuts and you pull things back, it's harder when people are not numbers. There's something to, that's kind of why the Undercover Boss show took off, of just what is it to be next to the frontline people? And how are your decisions affecting real people? When you see people, it's hard to not have some compassion start to swell up in yourself. Compassion closes the distance. It makes it harder to dismiss somebody when they're across the table with you. And I think about Christian conflict. It's not meant to be like who gets to win the argument, who gets to defeat someone else. I think Christ calls us to seeing in the midst of conflict that there's always another person on the other side of it, and refusing to stop seeing them as a person, as a neighbor, even if they're an enemy, to love them. So this week, I invite you to pay attention to who is encouraging you not to care. Who is telling you somebody else is not worth your compassion or your time? You might feel free from the influence, like you're like, hey, there's no royal banquet feast of power that I'm given with people around that kind of table. Or maybe I don't have a 12-person crew of disciples who are there for me. And you might not feel like you have that kind of influence. But we all have people calling us to be a little bit more callous-hearted than God created us to be. You might have those people come across through podcasts or talk shows or news shows telling you who to be afraid of or who to hate. You might have a YouTube algorithm pushing you towards videos that spiral you into more and more fears. You might have a workplace culture telling you to see people just as numbers. You might have an AI chatbot in today's world reaffirming whatever it is you say to it. So you cut off others from your thought process. Most of the people calling us to harden our hearts, we carry with us on our cell phones everywhere we go. The room follows us. And on this day, thinking about our teachers and our students and our parents and administrators, I think about everyone who is labeled a problem child or a bad kid and just people want to write off. There's always someone telling us to be more callous-hearted, to give up on compassion and love, but God calls us to see with different eyes. The next time you're invited to a contentious dinner table, to Herod's kind of table, you have a choice over how you will behave. Maybe my second grade self understood something that me as an adult still needs to remember. Just because everybody at the table is doing something doesn't mean you have to join in on it. The next time someone pushes you to snort the pepper shaker of exclusion, you don't have to do it. The next time they invite you to sniff the pepper shaker of fear, you can say no. It's okay. You don't have to eat what they're serving. Jesus invites us to his open table of love and compassion. And that's the kind of table that we are all invited to enjoy, but to share with those around us.